Hello, I welcome everybody who've joined in from different time zones. My name is Heli and I'm LSE's present council member and a master's student. I'm very delighted to welcome all of you with my friend Tanya, who heads events at the LSE-SU's Business and Investment Group. For those joining in from different time zones, let me reassure you that I'm going to leave you with thoughts for a very purposeful weekend. Coming from a country that has witnessed severe economic disparities, I decided to quit my career in investment banking and pursue this path of making a difference in the lives of those around me. Today, through this conversation, I aim to initiate a seed of change in individuals to not just look at risks and return, your investments, but risk, return, and impact. Let's explore how purpose is the new luxury with our panelists, Karan Malik and Serena Vaswani. I'm very delighted to welcome the two of you to this panel. Hi, Karan. Hi, Serena. How are you feeling about this event? And do you have any first thoughts as you join us for this event?
Hi, Heli. Thanks for having us. Looking forward to the conversation today and look forward to everyone's questions and appreciate the fact that people are joining in on a Friday evening.
Great. What about you, Serena? I'm sorry, Serena, you're on mute.
Hi, Heli. I just want to say a huge thank you. I know it's been very difficult to organize this event. We were hoping it would take place in London, but with COVID, but I'm glad we managed to do it via Zoom, and I'm really looking forward to it. Also, Karan, it's so great to finally meet you. I'm excited to learn more about your work with British Asian Trust, and also I'm sure there's a lot I can learn from you. So thank you.
Likewise, Serena, it's a real pleasure to finally meet you.
Great. So Karan heads programs at the British Asian Trust. He's worked with DASRA and BCG to improve public services delivery. He holds massive experience in working with nonprofits, more towards program design and public service delivery, majorly in South Asia. Our second panelist, Serena, who is an LSE alumna. She's co-founded the Stallion Empowerment Initiative, which operates in South Africa and is a philanthropic arm of the Stallion Empowerment Group. Her initiative primarily focuses on education, healthcare, and women empowerment. A quick housekeeping norm that I would just want to clarify with the audience is that this is going to be a very tight 60-minute event. I'd encourage the audience to engage with the panel by typing your questions through the chat. And as and when possible, we'll be taking through the questions or towards the end. So starting with Karan. Karan, could you very briefly tell us what does philanthropy mean to you personally? And can you throw some light upon your work at the British Asian Trust? What have been some of your existing priorities?
Sure. Thanks, Ellie. So working in this space, philanthropy, for me personally, it's a way of acknowledging my own privilege. I realized when I had the opportunity to go to university abroad that I had access to opportunities and experiences that most people don't. And that to me was a big wake-up call in terms of being able to see the immense privileges that I've been gifted with. And this is a way for me to use my skill sets, my knowledge, my experiences in trying, I don't want to say give back, but to try and level the playing field so that everyone can have access to the same opportunities. And that's what I think is really important to me. In terms of my work at the British Asian Trust, we focus upon working in education, livelihoods, child protection, and mental health. And we've also recently started working in conservation. These are all areas that I'm incredibly passionate about, especially child protection, which I think is a hugely under-recognized and underappreciated area of concern in India. And that's something that I'm really proud to be working on.
Right. Serena, similarly, could you please share about what drove you to start this initiative and what are some of your existing priorities?
So I'd say what philanthropy means to me personally is that in the world that we live in today, there's endless amount that we would like to see and change for a better tomorrow. I think my approach to philanthropy is from a humanist perspective. I think regardless of what walks of life you've lived in, and when you have a human connection with someone who's really struggling or doesn't know to get through life, you have a sense of wanting to give back and provide them with the right tools and foundations to improve their life. I would say the first time this really affected me in a profound way was when I was a child living in Lagos. I would witness children working on the streets being the same age of me, around 7 or 8. And it was extremely eye-opening. It reminded me of the amount of inequality and unjust there is in the world. And some of us may not be born with the same opportunities, but it is our duty as humans to contribute and help in our lifetime. And that is something that is in our control. I'd like to talk a little bit about our family foundation, which is Stallion Empowerment Initiative. I'll call it SEI just to make it easier. Often I get asked the question, why Nigeria? I would say from a personal level, for our family, we've had roots in Africa since the 1950s, shortly after the partition between India and Pakistan. So for my family, they migrated there and they've called Nigeria our home since then. And a lot of our business and social work has been based there as well. I would say another reason as to why is due to our family business. We're involved in different including agriculture, food distribution, and automobiles. Given the fact that we work in various states in Nigeria, it's allowed us to work with different communities and understand the struggles that their families face on a daily basis. If we can contribute either through education, healthcare, or youth empowerment, it's an opportunity for us to really improve their lives as well as make a difference to the communities and outreach others. I would also argue that currently, Nigeria has faced many issues when it comes to development. Currently, Nigeria is one of the youngest populations in the world with a median age of 18. The population is growing rapidly and is already one of the largest populations in Africa with around 200 million people. Like many African countries, Nigeria is an oil-rich country that has had a demand for a shift in the country in terms of diversity that will solve many of the issues around high unemployment, food security, and self-sufficiency. So SEI choose to focus on the youth, and we do this through our main programs that I mentioned earlier: education, healthcare, and youth empowerment.
That's good to know that what's common is child and youth empowerment, because that's where we can tap in the potential of into humans and look for a better tomorrow. But my next question is going to be ideally based on what do you think can essentially philanthropies achieve that businesses cannot? Because currently there's a surge in impact investing. There are also businesses that otherwise contribute to social causes. But what it actually differentiates a philanthropic institution from a business? Any one of you could go first.
Yeah, sure. I would be happy to go first. So I would say that philanthropy is about having an outreach and helping communities in an effective way. And it's about nurturing someone through social welfare to give them the right tools in life. You could say it's a collectivist approach, whereas business, on the other hand, is more individualistic and it is driven by profit and creating opportunities. However, I would argue that without social welfare and the betterment of society, you wouldn't have businesses functioning as well. So I think that's where philanthropy and social welfare can achieve what it can achieve on its own merits. I'd also say that we have noticed recently in the past decade or so that there has been a shift in the private sector, where many organizations have changed their models to address social issues in the environment. But whether this is what their motivation is behind this, I think we can all question and maybe wonder what is their incentive.
Great. Thanks, Serena. That's really really insightful, and I'll just build upon that. For me, philanthropy and the difference between philanthropy and business is that, like Serena said, business exists to make a profit, right? That's its core motive, and philanthropy I think plays many other functions, which are very important. So one of the things that philanthropy can do effectively is to find solutions to problems that no one else is addressing, and that can, in many occasions, that can mean the difference between cracking the solution to a problem and helping to scale it, maybe mainstreaming it through government approaches, creating sort of evidence behind it, and helping sort of mainstream development institutions being able to fund it publicly, right? So philanthropy can take many risks in terms of solving critical social development problems that otherwise perhaps no one would step into. And and that's primarily because I think if you look at individual philanthropy, that's driven by individual passion and commitment for a particular cause. Many philanthropists will be successful women or men who have applied uh, their their acumen and skill sets to solving other difficult issues, and will bring those skill sets to bear on philanthropy and solving the other critical challenges as well. I think philanthropy also plays an important role in filling service provision gaps that often exist where government, for example, fails to address those adequately enough. And I think we saw that recently. In last year, we saw that during COVID, during the lockdown, when there was critical sort of economic emergency almost in many parts of the world, you saw philanthropy. And here it was not just big ticket philanthropy, but also small individual donations that helped feed people who needed food and provide medical care to people. So philanthropy is very critical in that aspect as well.
Right. I think I'm going to come to individual donations and the role of government later in this event as we proceed. But I think that's also a very crucial point that you've put in, because individual donations, while they're a great way to make an impact at an individual level, I think impact is something that I definitely, and some of us, that's a debate ongoing, that how do we differentiate between individual donations versus institutions donating. And how do we really actually measure impact when an individual is making those donations out of the will of public good? But is that really creating an impact? Yes, so coming to talking about governments, I'm sure we have bottlenecks in the system. But I also wanted to talk about the Given Pledge, wherein about 211 signatories from the world have pledged close to $600 billion, which is a huge amount, and 64% of that amount, which is dedicated solely to the cause of education. What is your view on the fact that there is still 91 million children across South Asia and Africa that are out of school, don't receive education, don't have the means to receive the education? So taking a sort of a macro view, how does your respective organization tackle this specific problem of education inequity? This is for the both of you.
Okay. So I'm happy to touch on this. I would say that today, civil society and NGOs do play a very huge role in trying to scale up education. So for instance, in Nigeria, they follow the Universal Basic Education Program, like many different countries do as well, where they say that every child should spend at least 9 years of basic and compulsory education. However, according to UNICEF, 10.5 million children still don't have access to education from the age of 5 to 14. And over 41 million people still remain to be illiterate. And I would say this will differ depending on the state and whether they can propagate school. So for instance, I know we said in Nigeria, there's, especially in the northern regions, there's Sharia law that they have to take into consideration. And in the south, they follow the Nigerian national curriculum. So I'd say from civil society and NGOs, they can really adapt accordingly to the states, and they can find some of the concerns as to why students aren't attending school. So whether it be through child labor, logistics, gender equity, and so forth. And I think that some of these issues we notice in so many different developing countries. And it's really about how NGOs and civil society actors are coming together to try and find solutions or adapt certain interventions and initiatives to make it more adaptable for reality, as opposed to a universal approach.
Sure. Selena, would you also want to mention how does SEI particularly aim to tackle or tackles education inequity?
So currently we operate 2 primary schools and 1 technical high school in Warri, which is around the southeast of Nigeria, in Delta State. And we've currently improved the facilities in the school by providing a new library, introducing new youth empowerment and education programs. And I think that it's been a really great opportunity to kind of learn from the students and the teachers as to what they want and what will basically change their perspective on education and what they feel will really benefit them in the long term. I would say that currently we've been there as sort of as a service provider and to kind of really understand as to how we can improve their facilities and to just improve their learning attainments as well.
Great. Karan, I specifically want your insights on the ED crisis.
Sure. Thanks, Helly. So you touched upon a couple of things. First, let me talk about the giving pledge and my perspective on this. I think it's critically important for us to acknowledge that there are significant problems in terms of inequality, in terms of access to proper services. And there's equally a large number of very rich individuals in the countries that we are in. And a lot of them, I mean, there's no compulsion for people to give, but we should make more of an effort to encourage people to give and to give to the right sort of causes and the right kinds of programs. So there's a very enlightening study, I think perhaps Bain did a few years ago, where they looked at the amount of money coming into education through philanthropy in India. And what they found was that a significant majority of it, 60 to 70%, comes from one individual alone in India, Azim Premji, who runs one of India's largest education foundations. And that tells you something about sort of the giving culture that exists in philanthropy in India. And that's something that we are very, keen on developing further. BAT is working with philanthropists both in the UK as well as in India. We were founded by the South Asian diaspora in the UK. So we are a diaspora-led organization. We were founded by them primarily to give as a strategic vehicle for philanthropy in the countries where they came from. And we increasingly are working with givers in India and other countries in South Asia as well. Then quickly to touch upon what are we doing on education specifically. I think what we're trying to do here is look at what are the problems that need solving. So if you look at the statistics around India, you could arguably say, at least pre-COVID, you could have said that school enrollment was not as much of an issue anymore because we've sort of achieved a large-scale enrollment. What really was and continues to be an issue is a crisis in learning. So children aren't learning at the levels that they should be. There's a significant gap in their ability to read and write and do math at the levels that they should be expected to. So while and similar to what you said, Serena, we also have a large youth population, but we are not equipping them with the skills that we should. So what we are trying to do is look at how can we create evidence around which solutions work the best in terms of improving learning. So really focusing on outcomes. And we have 2.5 years ago, we launched something called a development impact bond, which ties payments to the outcomes that are achieved. So we have a large scale program for partners who are currently who are affecting 200,000 children across 4 states in India. And it's a very rigorously measured model where we're looking at getting evidence around what works and what doesn't. And that we think will help us scale this over time potentially through government.
Right. If I may also ask specifically about BATs, now that you've mentioned about how children were affected in regions of Rajasthan, and you particularly worked towards public services delivery to improve that, could you please throw some light upon that aspect that considerably improved the lives of vulnerable children there?
Yeah, sure. So we have been working in Rajasthan on a few different projects. One of the things that I'm most sort of proud of what we've done there is that over the last 3 years, we've been running a large-scale project that looks at vulnerable children who've been trafficked into Jaipur, which is the capital city of Rajasthan and a huge tourist destination. These children are trafficked in from other sort of less developed parts of the country, particularly the state of Bihar. And there are tens of thousands of children in Jaipur in workshops where they are forced to work 16 hours a day, producing gems and jewelry, handicrafts, bangles, and so on. And we've developed a program that looks very holistically at this issue and what we can do about that. So we are working with the police and judiciary and the state government to rescue children, to rehabilitate them, repatriate them safely, make sure that they're back in either education, that their families receive compensation and access to entitlement, so that these kids aren't re-trafficked. We're working with the judiciary to ensure that traffickers are prosecuted and sentenced, which is a deviation from the normal situation in India where there's almost no sentencing for trafficking. So this will act as a deterrent. We are working with businesses in Jaipur, and Jaipur is a huge export hub. So what we're doing is we created a certification mechanism that looks at supply chains. Right, all these businesses have suppliers and who in turn subcontract. So we're mapping all of these subcontractors, looking at where there might be children in their supply chains, and not from a point of view of saying we're going to penalize you. We're working with these businesses to say, let's work together. Let's make sure that you can get the certification so consumers know your goods are child labor free. At the same time, whatever kids we find in these supply chains, we'll rehabilitate them. And the long-term ambition is that if businesses adopt this, if businesses say that, look, we're going to make sure there are no children in our supply chains, the demand for children, to put it very crudely, in supply chains will go down. And that's, we think, a longer-term, more sustainable strategy of reducing trafficking than just prosecution alone. And that's something that I'm personally very invested in and very proud of this work.
Right. I'm sure this work has to be something that you must be proud of course, about, because it's a very emerging issue, and I'm sure that's in Africa as well. But Sarina, could you also touch upon the work that you're most proud of and that could be the smallest impact or the largest impact that you've been able to make? But yeah.
So sure, I would love to. I would say from a personal level, for me, it's about being involved in the smaller initiatives that we, let's say, do in our school, or some of the youth empowerment programs we also have. And it's really about addressing specific issues that we feel will individually, affect the children. So for instance, last year on International Women's Day, we had a discussion at our school, and we partnered up with a local Nigerian hygiene and sanitization company called Diva Pads. And we also got a nurse to come into the school and really speak to the girls about the importance of sanitization. And the response that we got was so outstanding. I mean, the girls literally wanted to go on with the Q&A for about an hour and a half because they had so many questions to ask. And to me, that was such a sign that, there's so much that actually needs to be talked about, but maybe it's considered to be taboo in some of these contexts. So I think that it was a very eye-opening moment for me to realize, given the fact that we had just started Stallion Empowerment Initiative, that it's okay to break those social barriers, and it's really important to address them. So next month, with International Women's Day coming up, we're also going to be raising awareness about domestic abuse, as this is also a very important topic that has come about since COVID-19. and we've seen a rise in all sorts of countries. So I'm really glad that the response so far has been great, and the children are having something to get from it and can really appreciate it. So I would say on that level, it's that's what I would most probably take, is having more an effect on the smaller initiatives.
Sure. I mean, SCI is a pretty young organization, and within less than 24 months, I think the impact that I have personally witnessed through the campaigns and through you that I've heard about, I think it's amazing. And it's these small steps that initiate a seed of change on the larger level. So I'm very hopeful of the impact that it could make, and I'm looking forward to that. But Karan, I would also specifically want you to talk about the program design. How has program design, like you spoke about child trafficking at this point, how has your program design helped resolve some of the bottlenecks in the system? And how have you solved those problems personally through your skill set or professionally through BAT?
Sure. So thanks, Helly. I think if I talk about bottlenecks in the system, I think one aspect of program design that I've personally seen, particularly while working with government, is that sometimes it's the simplest changes that make the largest difference. And with government especially, a lot of that is around using the right kind of data. So capturing and using the right kind of data. And, for example, I've seen in child welfare committees who are just tracking cases of children who've been rescued and repatriating them. All we had to do was literally create an Excel sheet and teach them how to use that, and make sure that they could put it on a pen drive, and that could go across to their children's home state of Bihar, where they could then plug it into their computer, access this. And of course, we had made backup copies over email, right? And so that cases could be tracked. Otherwise, inevitably, paper tracking would happen. They would lose trails. Children wouldn't get access to the benefits that they would do as survivors, and their legal cases would be in jeopardy because there was no paper trail. So sometimes it really is just about instituting small incremental changes. It's not about very fancy solution that might not work in the real world where you don't have access to fancy equipment. But I would say definitely when it comes to systemic changes, my biggest focus will always be on data and transparency, and on instituting the right kind of incentives for actors in the system.
Great. I think that's a great point, and increasingly data has made it very crucial. But there are also cases wherein data gathering is slightly difficult. And how do you both suggest that, do we solve that problem? Let's say in COVID right now, I have the context of let's say schools that I knew about that were not efficiently being able to gather data, and there's a sufficient sample size that we need to be able to deduce and make certain conclusions, right? So during COVID, or especially during a crisis, how do you think can we solve this problem of data management, data collection, and analyzing that to be able to translate into sustainable solutions? Yes, any one of you could go first. Yeah.
Sure, I'm happy to go ahead. I think COVID has been a particular challenge for many of our partners because because of the lockdowns, right? There was no access. There was no way to access the communities that they work with. You can't go out in the field. You can't go to communities. Children aren't coming to school. And to top it off, if you think that you can access people and have information flow through phones, and digital is being touted as a solution, right? Well, the real challenge is that there is a huge digital gap which exists. Low-income communities don't have access to the same access to devices or even the internet, while that's improved significantly. But in many cases, for example, we work a lot with adolescent girls in low resource communities, and girls are less likely to have access to phones, less likely to have access to their individual phones, their personal phones. and even have access to the shared family phone. So that's been a big challenge. I think some of our partners, we work to find some solutions with them. For example, using low cost radio to transmit their programs, to have access uh, to be able to still reach girls, or use automated voice calling to reach parents and give them information and then hear back from them. So we've gone to some low cost solutions and had to adapt.
Right. Serena, if would you like to speak more on this, or can we proceed? Yeah.
As you mentioned before, I think collecting data still seems to be such a challenge, especially in the context of Nigeria. In the northern regions, we barely have any data on education or healthcare. But given the fact that we are a small organization, our sample size is small, and we have to take that into consideration, that we can't really draw on much conclusions from it. But what we have managed to do in the past year and a half is collect qualitative data and surveys through interviews. And this has been also very useful to see as to what programs are working and maybe not. We also plan to work with third-party organizations as well that we think will be able to help us collect more data over time, so we can do more comparative studies with other NGOs to understand from a regional perspective as to what is working and maybe what is not.
Sure. And I'll ask you to answer the next question as well. So coming to the theory of state, where essentially the state is viewed as a rent-seeking body in the form of, collecting taxes, and that being utilized into effective public services delivery. How effective do you think has been the role of the state, and how do you think can be it made more effective? By state, I mean governments here.
Sorry, you just froze for a second.
Okay.
Can you, repeat the last one?
Sure, I can. So coming to the theory of state, where it is essentially the role of the government, which is viewed as a rent-seeking body for delivering effective public services. How do you think could that be made more effective in your context, either through partnerships or independently through change in policies? Do you have a view on this specifically during COVID or even otherwise in the space that you're working in?
Okay, Karan, do you mind taking this question? I just want to think about it for a second. Thank you.
Sure. So I'd say two things from my perspective on how to improve sort of state delivery, and having seen sort of public service delivery both from public sector consulting as well as in working with nonprofits. One thing, again, I'll go back to my favorite point, data. So what kind of data does the state collect, right? What kind of data are they looking at? So are they looking at, if you just take a program that the government is supposed to run, are they looking at what kind of impact that program has had, or are they just looking at whether they've sort of they've delivered the inputs to that program? So have they laid down the right number of pipes that they were supposed to for a water project, or are they actually measuring if water is coming out of those pipes and is reaching the last mile or not? So that makes all the difference in terms of what you qualify as success. And then tying in incentives for government and tying in to those outcomes, I think, is critical. So one of the things that you'll find, at least in the public sector in India, that there are no repercussions for doing a bad job, right? And so how do you create a culture of high performance is one question I think that needs to be solved. And then there's another thing that I think can create perhaps lead to certain behaviors being achieved is, again, looking at how you tie in the payments to achieving the right kind of results. So for example, I spoke about the fact that we have a development impact bond that ties payments to outcomes. Can you move to social impact bonds over time, where governments are paying only if outcomes are achieved? So if public service delivery is achieved successfully, if results are met, then government pays. Otherwise, they don't. So that, again, is another thing I could help.
Right. Sarina, I personally know that you're very passionate about women empowerment, sanitation, and even during COVID, there was some work that SEI did. Would you want to throw some light upon what was that work? How did you go about designing and impact measuring? And if not COVID, if there's any specific program that you'd want to throw light upon?
No, I would say COVID-19 was actually an opportunity for us to work with public-private partnerships. We managed to do a lot of different initiatives during that period. I'll first talk about the ones that we did with the government, and then later the initiatives we did with women empowerment. But you know, we pledged free rice and fish to government hospitals the first 3 months of the pandemic to sort of ease that pressure off the government that were really struggling with their hospitals at the time. And also we introduced a mobile health clinic across Lagos as well, where we managed to treat 20,000 patients within the matter of 3 months. And that was also a great opportunity for us to ease the pressure off state hospitals. In terms of raising awareness about women empowerment and also the importance of mask wearing, which we've noticed, you know, in a lot of countries, they're still not abiding by those regulations and rules. We managed to partner up with some farming cooperatives in Kano, and we were encouraging the female farmers to actually sew Ankara face masks as an opportunity for them to not only educate their communities, but also support them during the pandemic, as many of them weren't having access to work. And this was a really great opportunity for us to interlink all of our different initiatives together, as we were eventually able to distribute the masks to different NGOs as well as other communities as well. So that was a really great opportunity for us. We also managed to work with other NGOs like Food, which is a food bank in Lagos, to really help communities that were struggling at the time. And I think that if COVID-19 really taught us anything, was the fact that it's an amazing opportunity for us to really all work together in an effective way, and especially for public-private partnerships. So yeah.
Right. Coming to public-private partnerships, Karan, is there any specific instance that you recall, that can recall of, that such a partnership has brought an impact that otherwise wouldn't have been possible?
Absolutely. I think our work is really focused all about creating the right kind of public-private partnerships to achieve change. So, for example, the work in Jaipur that I've spoken about, where we are working in partnership with the government to ensure that kids have access to the best kinds of support, that we are stepping up rescues, rehabilitation, and government has been a complete partner with us. And with both philanthropy and with nonprofits in helping to achieve that goal. Even during COVID, I think we had a large appeal that we launched to support people in need, where we had private philanthropy really step up and support us. And then we worked with our nonprofit partners and with government to ensure that we were able to get food relief and emergency medical relief to the vulnerable communities most in need. So I think at every step of the way, we have examples of public-private partnerships.
Sure. And could you particularly draw upon the development of bonds that you mentioned? Because, and Sarina, I'd also meanwhile ask you to think about how do you think about financing some of these initiatives? Is there a dedicated amount that's allotted for these initiatives? Do you pool funds for it, or how do you go about it? But meanwhile, Karan, could you please tell me that how is the development finance bond working, and what is the repayment mechanism? Also, is this about the market return that that we can expect out of the investments made, or is there a suboptimal market return that we can expect?
Sure. So the development impact bond, in essence, a development impact bond ties in payments to outcomes, to successful outcomes being achieved. We launched a DIB 3 years ago. It's the total value of the DIB is $11 million, and it's impacting 200,000 children over 4 states, as I mentioned. Now, in simple terms, if you look at a conventional development funding model, what you have is donors giving money to nonprofits for delivering certain kinds of services. So they pay them upfront, nonprofits go ahead, deliver services, and then come back and say, this is what we did, right? Many times, I'm not saying all the time, many times what happens is that they come and tell you what they did, but you may never found out whether it actually worked or not. So what happens in a development impact bond is you have a private funder. We call that a risk investor. In our case, that's UBS, the private bank. UBS has put forth the initial capital for service providers, for nonprofits who will be selected through numerous rounds of due diligence for amazing service providers. UBS has given them the money to go out and deliver programs in education. These are for nonprofits with different models, operating in different geographies. But the key thing is all of them are being measured on exactly the same 2 things: improvements in numeracy and improvements in literacy. So, and we've got a third-party firm that's actually done the baseline and is doing the midlines and end lines. So it's rigorous perspective, rigorous tracking of data. And what happens is every year, this data gets tracked. We see our children achieving those learning outcomes that we have agreed to. If they are, then there's a separate set of funders who include Michael and Dell Susan Foundation, the Lakshmi Mittal Foundation, and others. These funders pay back UBS the capital that it's given, along with the rate of return on its investment.
I'd just like to interrupt. I'm so sorry. I'd like to interrupt. Is this the nominal market rate return, or is this a suboptimal return?
Suboptimal.
Okay.
Suboptimal. It's because you're doing it as a recognition that this is sort of a development project, right? And but yes, there is a rate of return. So it's not pure philanthropy from UBS's perspective, but it is taking a risk because if these children aren't learning at the levels that we've said they would, then UBS doesn't get its money back. It loses the capital that it's invested as well. So there is a powerful incentive for us to invest in the best models, the ones that we're completely sure will work. There's complete transparency of data because there's a third party tracking. And what's really important is that in this program, we don't care about tracking inputs, right? So we don't care if you said you'll do 30 teacher trainings and you've only done 20. Doesn't matter. All we care about is you said, this is how much learning levels of children will go up by. Have they achieved those results or not?
Right. To just sum up quickly, you mean to say it's just aligned, it's very results oriented. So you can customize the approach, but it's more about reaching the approach and achieving the outcome within the desired time period, right?
Absolutely.
I think that's great. The field of social finance is evolving, and this is a great breakthrough in the field. Serena, meanwhile, I know the panel is so diverse. We've picked up it in a way wherein you can bring such a macro view, and Serena can bring such a micro view from what she started, which is such a new baby that she's upbringing and it's going to eventually emerge. Serena, how do you think can essentially people such as you who've starting off new in this field, pool such funds or bring in CSR initiatives? How have you actually managed those?
So I would say as it's a family foundation, we sort of set aside a budget as to how much we would like to donate every year towards SEI. Accordingly, my brother and I will put together a plan as to what initiatives we would like to focus on, and then accordingly a CapEx requirement for it. As of now, because we're a family foundation, we haven't really taken many donations apart from one close family friend who was very interested in the work that we were doing. And he helped us with a library refurbishment and when we put up the new infrastructure for it in 2019. And I would say that would probably be the only time I've taken a donation through a family friend. But otherwise, we like to fund all of our projects ourselves. And I think we'll continue to do so, even though we hope to keep on expanding over the time. So yes, thank you.
Great. So I'm basically going to come to a few, the last question that I have from my end. But before that, Serena, could you also tell me about Africa as a place wherein there's severe economic disparities and inequalities? Do you think civil society organizations are doing what they have to, or is it more independently driven? Like, you have started something that you did out of an intrinsic motivation. Do you think individuals in Africa have been motivated enough to get into this space, or does it need still more help and more interventions to align to the larger purpose?
So I would say that there's definitely been a lot of different NGOs and civil society actors that have been involved. However, I would still say that the space, there's a bit of blurred lines in between, and it's not as regulated as we would like it to be. There's also the conception that people don't necessarily trust NGOs, so they're a bit hesitant in Nigeria to give to them. And I think that with time, as transparency is becoming so important with NGOs, this is slowly shifting. And I hope that with time, more people actually start NGOs or foundations and really contribute to this, because I definitely think within the context of Nigeria, it's very much needed, because even though it's very small scale, in the long term, it will actually make quite a large impact.
Right. The question now that I have is for the two of you, and anyone can hop in. This field is slightly undermined, and it's believed that this is more of an intrinsic motivation. When personally, for me, when I quit investment banking, it was more of like, why did you quit something for the larger purpose? But how do you think, what are some of the essential skills and knowledge aspects that are actually required to be in this space? And what are your comments on how can individuals better contribute into this space so that it can be as large as what we expect it to be in the finance field or any other space that's slightly more preferred over this?
Yeah, of course. So from my own personal experience, my education background interested me into the field of development and social work. I had studied for my undergrad at SOAS in development studies and history in South Asia and Africa. This was extremely useful in terms of my knowledge basis to understand the complexities about colonial history and post-independence in these regions, as much of the issues are still very prevalent today in society, such as religious differences, indirect rule, nationalism, and so forth. I would say my master's at LSE in development studies and in social policy and development, NGO stream, was also very useful to understand the practicalities of having an NGO and the role it plays in society in terms of public-private partnerships, accountability, transparency, and so forth. I would say that the skills required for this work is enthusiasm is extremely important. You should feel very passionate about the initiatives you're working with. Networking in terms of international scale as well as local. Social awareness, you want to make sure whatever initiatives you introduce, it's for the better good, and you'll notice a change for the positive. Patience, if you're contributing towards long-term development, and teamwork and communication as well is extremely important.
I think I'm still developing patience because I'm very much results oriented and I need quick results, which is of course not possible in the space we're working in. There's so many actors involved. Karan, would you comment on how can we improve youth sensitivity? And meanwhile, I'd encourage people to drop in questions through the chat function, because we have the last few minutes that we want to dedicate to taking your questions. I believe there are a few who expressed interest to write their questions down. Yeah, yes, Karan.
You mean youth sensitivity towards making careers in this field?
Yes, and also more consciously contributing to these causes. How can we help or develop mechanisms in which the youth could be more empowered and informed to make a conscious choice to contribute to these causes?
Yeah, well, I think at some level, uh, there is a reality that some of it is a bigger structural solution than you and I can manage, which is, are we paying people a fair wage in this sector, right? And our incentives do skew towards paying people really high sums of money for in jobs that may or may not be for the best interest of society, but unfortunately, the ones where they might make a difference, people don't think you need to pay people because you substitute that with some amount of internal gratitude for doing this job. You can't make a living on enthusiasm, right? You need to get paid, and I think it's a reality that we need to improve that in this sector, and that's where funders need to step up and play a role. I think there's also something to be said about improving the discourse around the development sector and treating it and on par with any other profession. It's a very diverse field. There's lots of different types of organizations, and the skill sets that you would require in this are no different from any other for-profit organization in terms of the you know the aptitude or the skill sets that you might bring to roles here.
Sure. Thank you so much. I think that's that. We do not have enough incentives. It's intrinsic motivation that drives, but I think it's also keeping an eye open and seeing the problems around you and having the willingness to be able to make a difference to those, because it should essentially be that your success lies in that of those around you, and it isn't a personal level success. But yeah, I think that's too deep, and I'd now open it to questions. There's Harsh who's dropped in a question. Harsh, do you want to yourself take this, and I'll actually let Anas and Mohit also take the questions that they want to, giving you all also the time to engage with panelists. Yes, Harsh, are you ready? You can go forward with taking the question.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Firstly, very interesting talk. Thank you for the panelists to take the time to get on. I think it's been quite insightful for all of us. I just wanted to kind of jump in with one quick question. Obviously, two coming from very different backgrounds. I wanted to understand what do you think are the differences in effectivity where a private sector company doing impact investing, impact initiatives, what's the difference between that versus a larger NGO and their more obviously relatively more structured and democratic way of making decisions? I'll leave the floor to you guys.
I'll go back to my favorite topic, which is data and incentives. If impact investing over time, if you are making certain investments, they're not giving you the return that you expect, or creating the kind of impact that you want, you'll eventually run out of money, right? People will stop giving you money to invest. For nonprofits, I think it depends. If you're not tracking the right kind of data and no one's holding you accountable for what you're achieving, then you'll continue doing what you're doing without caring about whether it's working or not. So if the sector makes a concerted effort to shift payments to what works and what doesn't and demands accountability, then we will have more effectiveness.
Right.
Any thoughts?
Yes.
Any thoughts from? Thank you, Karan. Any thoughts from you also, Serena, from your perspective?
No, I thought Karan summarized it pretty well. I don't actually personally have anything else to add, but yeah.
Thanks, Harsh, for your great question.
Great. Anas, do you want to take your next question?
Yeah, thank you. Hi, thank you for this actually very, very insightful call. So I'm from Morocco, and I've worked a lot with philanthropies in my country through my family. So we've been doing a lot of things like through different people, etc. And one very, very big difficulty that I've always found was to actually make people talk about their experiences. because there are a lot of people that do a lot of things, that build a lot of schools, that actually do a lot of important things. But there's this culture in Morocco and in other countries. A lot of my friends from Senegal, from other countries in Africa, talk to me about this, and it's this culture of being very discreet with the way you help people, and I find it quite not useful for the sake of what we're trying to do, in the sense that it's very important to actually share what we're doing, so that we can have access to this data that you're talking about, because a lot of people get the data that they need for their own project, but they're not giving it to each other. They're not giving it to someone that would have exactly the same issue, let's say in Mali, for example. And so my question would be, how do you guys think we could actually try and make this this go outside of this cultural challenge, and how did you experience it yourself? Thank you.
So no, I think that's a really important question to ask. And I would say from my own personal experience, I thought going to conferences, I can send a list out if you want. I attended the Nexus conference in New York in 2019 and the Milken Institute last year in Abu Dhabi, and it was extremely useful to meet other philanthropists and other NGOs and different IOs, and actually speak to them about some of the initiatives and interventions they were running. And I think that it's really useful to understand from other people's perspectives, as well as understanding what they're also doing. So I would, as I mentioned earlier, I think when it comes to this work, networking is extremely important, because you're constantly learning from each other. And what's maybe being adapted in a certain country, you can maybe apply a similar initiative into yours. So I think that's something that would be very useful. If you would like, yeah, as I mentioned, I'll send you a list, and I'm sure I'll see you at the next conference.
Great, amazing. That all, yes, sorry, please go on.
Sorry. No, I think that's a fantastic question. I think one thing from my perspective is it's really great, right? It depends on what kind of stories you tell. So you may, for example, if philanthropists are not keen on going ahead and talking about their work, what about the organizations that they're supporting? How can you get those stories to be told in the public domain? How do you I think a couple of things are important. One, investing in their capacities to collect the right kind of data and then tell those stories, and then having the dissemination means to do so. So we invest a lot in capacity building in the organizations we work with, so they can collect and talk about the right kind of data and results. And I think it's also really critical. In India, we've had a fantastic resource come up in the last few years called the India Development Review, which is a nonprofit online journal that discusses issues in the development sector. And I think that's really democratized a lot of information sharing. And especially, I think one really cool thing that they're doing is talking about failures in the sector. And that's something people don't talk about. What did they do that failed? What did they learn from that? So it's available free online. And I think it's a great resource.
That's such a good note to end on, learning from failures. I don't think this could have been better summarized than what you just told, Karan. I'll just keep it open to one last question if anybody wants to jump in before we call it an end to this amazing event that we've had today. I'm going to just wait for 30 more seconds until I hear from someone. Are there any final thoughts, Karan or Serena, if there's anything that I have missed on and you would want to touch upon and that you feel would be of a good learning to any of our audience here?
Oh, just to say, I really enjoyed this interaction. Thank you, Heli, for putting this together. Pleasure, Serena, to learn more about your work. And thank you, everyone, for sitting in patiently. And thanks for your wonderful questions. This has been fantastic.
Sure.
Thank you so much once again for organizing this. I think it went off very smoothly, and it was really interesting to hear your perspective as well, Karan. And thank you everyone for listening.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm again very, very grateful to all those. It's quite late in India, and I see some of you all joining from India. Even Karan, I know it's pretty late. I apologize for that, but thank you for your patience. I also personally thank all our event partners, and I look forward to our future engagements in this space. Thank you.
Thank you very much.